Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, hazardous weather graphic, still a high wind watch out up toward Skagway area and also down around Juneau Douglas. High wind watch out late tonight through the weekend for possible wind gusts of 50 to 70 miles per hour to the northeast. And from there are no other watches, warnings, or advisories out around the state. So moving on, satellite imagery showing really cleared out over interior Alaska, and the white shaded area there, really this is an infrared shot, and that's just showing the cold ground, temperatures well below zero, Copper River Basin, areas northwest and north of the Alaska Range, all the way up to the North Slope areas. And showers early today, rain and snow showers scattered around the Panhandle, ending pretty much this afternoon as the north winds start to increase and the colder, drier air begins to seep into the northern portions of the Panhandle there, especially through Lynn Canal and the other channeled areas. Winds gusting up out of the north to around 50 miles an hour at Eldred Rock this afternoon. Will continue to increase tonight and tomorrow. Otherwise, moisture flowing from south to north, staying to the west out over the Bering Sea as strong high pressure continues to strengthen with the surface high up around west of Arctic Village there, and the pressure is approaching 1,060 millibars. And then another band way out there toward the Komodorskis, and again, that all that moisture is getting directed northward and being blocked by the high. It's also building aloft and at the surface over interior Alaska and into the Gulf areas. On the surface map, you can see today about 1,055 millibars so far, should go to 1,060 this evening, and of course 1,050 and up altimeters are off the scale. They hit top end at about 1,050 millibars, which is 31 inches of mercury, and so it'll just be, you'll be maxed out on your altimeter if you're flying around up in the northern interior for the next 36 hours. Otherwise, blizzard conditions ended on the eastern Arctic coast earlier today. Winds coming down considerably there, with the blowing snow condition also improving dramatically with those decreasing winds. And out over the Bering Sea, mild southeast flow brought rain to the eastern Aleutians. Kind of a narrow band of precipitation there, about half inch falling at Unalaska in the last 12 hours, but lighter amounts. It's a few hundredths of an inch at the Pribilofs, Adak and Atka, a few hundredths of an inch, and Alaska Peninsula seeing anywhere from maybe up to 5/100ths of an inch at the most, with some scattered showers up along the northern Alaska Peninsula. But Kodiak Island basically clear, some clouds beginning to show up off to the west there, but pretty nice day today, and clear skies and colder temperatures in over much, especially south central Alaska today. And those winds, you can see the tightening gradient over the northern southeast coast as that trough slides off to the southeast. Those shower conditions will be ending tonight and they'll be out of the area as winds and colder air begin to push southward into the northern Panhandle and to a lesser extent down to the south, but it will reach down there during the weekend all the way to Dixon Entrance and likely beyond, as that you can see that high center now just north of Eagle there over toward the border, now up to about 1,061 millibars, and that dominating all of interior Alaska into the northern Bering Sea, and light southerly flow keeping any moisture in the Arctic now well off the Arctic coast. Rain moderate to heavy at times with gusty east-southeast winds continue for the eastern Aleutians. Winds should diminish along the southwest coast. Cape Romanzoff today had east winds gusting to 71 miles per hour. Cape Newenham, east-southeast up to 55 miles per hour. And Nikolsky, you'll stay windy there, had winds gust to 50 miles an hour, and that windy condition will continue for both Nikolsky and Alaska Dutch Harbor. And a little breezy for the Alaska Peninsula, with most of the rainfall occurring on the Pacific side of the peninsula there, kind of on the lee side. lighter amounts, if any at all, for the Nelson Lagoon area. Port Hayden should be dry, and definitely Bristol Bay dry, mostly clear, colder temperatures. Variably cloudy for Kodiak Island with fairly light winds. And up along the Arctic coast, light winds as well, can almost go light and variable for the eastern Arctic coast. They will go light and variable for the eastern Arctic coast tonight. And then tomorrow, same thing, could lead to some areas of fog there for the central and eastern Arctic coast. A little bit of an offshore breeze. Be a few clouds for the west side there, western north slope, but generally dry conditions. And tightening gradient looks pretty gusty or windy through the passes of the eastern central Alaska Range, Copper River Basin, right on down to the North Gulf Coast, although it won't be blasting out of the Copper River Delta like it could this time of the year, but it'll be blasting through Lynn Canal tomorrow and into the Juneau area, Douglas area, and increasing winds over the southern southeast coast as cold air continues to move southward across the Panhandle through the day, and temperatures falling maybe toward record levels late tomorrow night and Sunday into early Monday. Otherwise, no change out west. Frontal boundary right over Unmak Island keeps moderate rain going for Unalaska Island, spreading into the western Alaska Peninsula, a little more extensive now. And then the Pribilos right on the northern edge of that precipitation field, showers over the western and central Aleutians. Otherwise, mostly clear skies, very cold temperatures, staying well below zero. Interior Alaska, north and west of the Alaska Range, and even some areas possibly below zero in the Susitna Valley in that cold zone, the Susitna Valley cold zone, which includes Willow. Generally west of the Talkeetna area, it's usually warmer there, but definitely well below freezing right down into the North Gulf Coast. And then for Sunday, a little bit of a change occurring over the Gulf of Alaska. Seeing some increasing moisture. The weak trough could bring some light snow to the eastern North Gulf Coast, maybe Montague Island, southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula, possibly Seldovia, but just a chance. Have to watch that. A little bit better chance of moisture getting to Kodiak Island. Could be in the form of rain or snow. Looks light at this time, but you know how that goes. And for the Alaska Peninsula, periods of rain or rain and snow mix, depending on your elevation, but stays mild out in those areas over the Bering Sea. Strong north winds, temperatures continue to plunge over the northern Panhandle and stays very cold over interior Alaska with highs staying below zero most areas all the way out to the Arctic coast. Winds will be lighter, but you can see that cold dry air now all the way down to the Dixon entrance into British Columbia, covering the Queen Charlottes. And for lows, or actually this morning's low temperatures, Weissman was a cold spot in the state at 39 degrees below zero. Manly Hot Springs about the same at minus 38, as was Arctic Village, 38 below. Bettles, mid-minus 30s with Fort Yukon. Tanana, 32 below. And Goldstream Valley there, east of Fairbanks, 28 below. Eagle, minus 27. Airport at Fairbanks in the mid-minus 20s with Galena, McGrath, and the Nana, Denali Park. And looking at the lows for tonight for the Copper River Basin, 35 below there, and minus 30 possibly for McGrath and Nikolai, warmer to the south. Single numbers, Bristol Bay. And in the upper 20s for Kodiak, below zero. South Central Alaska, anywhere from 5 to 20 below. Coldest again in that Big Lake Willow stretch there, the Susitna Valley cold zone. And for the down into the mid-teens for the northern Panhandle, 20s down to the south. Highs tomorrow below freezing all across the southeast coast, not even making 20 for Juneau for the highs tomorrow. In the mid-teens up Lynn Canal, Klondike Highway, well below zero the Copper River Basin. And for lows the following morning, 30 to 40 below for the Copper River Basin, 25 to 30 below in the Kuskokwim Valley, and 10 to 15 for Bristol Bay, 5 to 20 below South Central Alaska, and down to close to zero for the northern Panhandle. Otherwise, 10 to 20 elsewhere, mostly in the 10 to 15 range. High single numbers, northern southeast coast, maybe 10 for Juneau, lower 20s to the south and along the west coast, mid-minus 20s for the Copper River Basin, below zero in the Kuskokwim Valley, mid-30s Kodiak Island, 0 to 5 South Central Alaska. Lows tonight, 25 to 45 below for the northeast interior, followed by highs tomorrow, staying well below zero up to the Arctic coast, but milder for the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island area. And then lows 30 to 50 below. NOSA minus 52 at Northway and Tok, followed by highs barely getting above 50 below in those areas, staying below zero just about everywhere else, but again, teens for the Seward Peninsula, and to the southwest, 5 to 15 for the southwest coast, but above freezing for the Pribilofs, near 40 in the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, followed by highs 40 to 45 in those areas, around 40 for the Pribilofs, below freezing on the southwest coast. Lows about the same, and then highs in the 40s again for the Aleutians.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather for Saturday morning, pretty good through interior Alaska. There's some marginal VFR for the eastern North Slope and Arctic coast, but you can see VFR all along the west coast. Some marginal VFR St. Lawrence Island and along the west side of Nunivak Island. And also some marginal VFR kind of shifting in across Fognak and eastern Kodiak Island down to Sitkinak. But the North Gulf Coast, good VFR. Same thing for the Panhandle. Some marginal VFR over toward Hyder and Stewart. IFR, pretty widespread from St. Matthew Island to the Pribilofs, westward to just north of Shimei and Attu, and eastward to the southern western Alaska Peninsula. For the afternoon, not much change, a little bit better up over the North Slope, but still some marginal VFR clinging to the eastern Arctic coast. Interior Alaska, VFR all the way down to Togiak Bay, Bristol Bay, all along the coast, maybe some marginal VFR possibly for Cape Newenham. And then St. Lawrence Island marginal, IFR, Pribilofs, most of the Aleutians, and the western Alaska Peninsula. Still marginal VFR east side of Kodiak Fognak Island, but good VFR for the North Gulf Coast. Now all of the Panhandle VFR. And Sunday morning, IFR again, eastern Arctic coast, otherwise VFR in the interior. Most of Kodiak Island now marginal. So marginal VFR developing in the Gulf of Alaska there with a weak system, the cold outflow generating some snow showers. So some marginal VFR may reach Cape St. Elias or so, but nothing may probably staying off the coast at least through the morning hours. Panhandle looking good, VFR, IFR out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And that pretty much holds out west there through Sunday afternoon, but you can see the marginal VFR zone in the Gulf becoming much more widespread and pressing up toward the eastern North Gulf coast. Very close to the coastline, kind of wait and see what happens there. Stays VFR over the Panhandle, all of interior Alaska VFR, Bering Strait, Chukchi Sea, VFR, and again, IFR out over the central southern Bering Sea, and now central Aleutians and southern coast of the Alaska Peninsula. Nothing but VFR for the Brooks Range tomorrow, at least for Anatuvik and Adigan passes. Lake Clark and Merrill, good VFR. Ceilings visibility is unlimited for rainy, windy, and Isabel. With Mentasta, looking at VFR through the day tomorrow and Sunday as well. Tanita VFR through the weekend, and Portage VFR. Chilkoot and White VFR right through the weekend with freezing levels now. Warmer air aloft coming up into the southwest interior. We've got 6,000 feet into the southern Kuskokwim Valley, 2,000 feet up to the north coast of the Yukon Delta and the northern Kuskokwim Valley, and Kodiak Island about 6,000 feet, but at the surface now pushing southward there into Dixon Entrance out west and coming northward out over the western Bering Sea towards St. Matthew Island. And as far as icing goes, all staying out to the west there, big area high pressure over the interior, southerly and southeasterly flow, keeping all that moisture out over the Bering Sea. Some isolated moderate rime icing could slip on up to the Alaska Peninsula, and then there could be some considerable moderate rime icing out over the west central Aleutian areas, mostly above 6,000 feet. And moving on to the jet stream, upper level ridging kind of extending from southeast to northwest there near St. Lawrence Island, Bristol Bay, across the interior, northwest flow 70 to 80 knots. Stronger across Yakutat up to 95 knots and about 100 knots from the northwest across Prince of Wales Island. Southeast 100 knots in the southern Bering Sea, a narrow band there. And at 9,000 feet, southeast winds across the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, right up to the Pribilofs and into the central Bering Sea, 55 to 60 knots. Pretty light under the ridge axis over the western part of the state, northern Bering Sea. And then northerlies up to 40 knots there coming across the Copper River Basin. Strongest winds off to the west of the Panhandle, but 3,000 feet. Seeing the stronger outflow winds now across Yakutat, about 60 knots. Northern Panhandle, 45 to 50 knots. Southeast, 60 to 65 knots across eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, Pribilofs, and easterlies 45 knots there over the west central interiors of the lower and mid Yukon River Valley areas. Turbulence. Moderate turbulence, northern Panhandle, North Gulf Coast, Alaska Range, and the Aleutians.
It used to be that you could only warn one person about a tornado after it had already blown down someone else's barn.
Now, on average, we're able to issue a tornado warning 15 minutes before the tornado's even there, and that wouldn't be happening without Doppler radar.
This NexRad system has reduced fatalities on the order of 45% due to tornadoes since its advent.
We have a lot more information now about storms and being able to understand how they develop, how they produce severe weather, and how that information might be used to improve warnings for our National Weather Service partners.
The lab is unique in that we serve the nation by supporting the National Weather Service in its mission to protect lives and safe property by improving the accuracy and the lead time of severe weather warnings.
We have a legacy of radar research and converting existing technology from military to weather purposes.
A recycled Doppler radar led to the development of NexRad, installed nationwide in the early 90s. It allowed forecasters to see storms like never before.
Not only did we help bring that technology to the National Weather Service and to help protect lives and property, but we have continued to upgrade that technology, keep it relevant, and keep it state-of-the-art.
Recently, a major upgrade was added. Dual polarization technology takes the radar from 2D to 3D. Forecasters now know more about what type of precipitation is falling, which is very helpful during winter storms, as well as how much rain is accumulating, resulting in better flash flood warnings. The radar can also detect and track tornadoes based on debris. Looking to the future, the National Severe Storms Lab is testing the capabilities of phased array radar. Originally used by the U.S. Navy, the antenna scans the skies electronically rather than mechanically, allowing the radar to focus on a storm.
With current technology, we get a full picture or image of what is going on within a storm every 4 to 5 minutes. So it's more like a snapshot. Whereas with phased array radar, we get that picture of what's going on in the storm every minute. So it becomes more like watching a movie. So we can do adaptive, rapid scanning on the storms that matter most, being able to provide the information that's most relevant when and where it's happening.
Another advantage of phased array radar is its multifunction capability, providing weather and air traffic information simultaneously.
Number one, it is a system that promises to replace and expand upon the existing weather surveillance radars. Secondly, to replace aging air traffic surveillance radars. And number three, it offers the potential application to meet Department of Homeland Security and defense requirements for identifying and tracking non-cooperative aircraft. With the replacement of all these various radars with a single system, the American taxpayer could realize substantial savings in cost.
You have a lot fewer radars to maintain, and the electronic capability of this also reduces maintenance costs because you do not have moving parts.
Not too long ago, the ability to predict severe weather was thought to be impossible. During the past several decades, research conducted at the National Severe Storms Lab has developed life-saving tools like Doppler radar. We've progressed from no warning of threatening weather to about a 15-minute lead time, and current research promises to extend that much further.
Our knowledge of severe storms and how they behave, and our use and ability to use the Doppler radar technology and is in a lot of cases a direct result of that close working relationship, that research to operations component that we get between the National Severe Storms Laboratory and a forecast office.
That history and understanding of how these data can be used by our users and doing the research to help advance the use of radar technology, really it's what we live for. It's in our lifeblood. It's in our history.
It's now easier than ever to be a part of weather research. We just launched the MPing app for both iPhone and Android users, and it's totally free. PING, which stands for Precipitation Identification Near the Ground, is a research project by the NOAA National Severe Storms Lab and the University of Oklahoma. With the mobile app, you can send us your weather observations on the go. Are snowflakes falling on your head? Is hail hitting your car? Just select what type of precipitation is falling and press submit. It's that easy. It takes about 5 seconds and it's anonymous. Reports can then be viewed online. Our scientists will compare your report with what the radar has detected. This helps us develop new radar technologies and techniques. Download the app today, share your reports, and let's work together to make our nation weather ready. Learn more here and follow us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Moving on to coastal water forecast. North winds 45 knots with higher gusts for Lynn Canal for the day Saturday. Gale warnings for Stevens Passage. Winds north 35 knots and 20-knot winds out of the north for Clarence Strait. On the south coast, small craft advisories, north to northeast winds 25 to 30 knots. And full gales on the north coast out of the northeast at 45 knots, seas up around 15 feet. And for Sunday, east winds on the north coast, gale force easterlies, 35 knots. Now, Lynn Canal, northwest at 30 knots, and small craft advisories continue on the south coast. Out of the east and northeast, 25. Northeast 25 for Stevens Passage, Clarence Strait, northeast at 20. Prince William Sound for Saturday, northeast winds 15 knots, seas 2 feet. East 25-knot winds for the eastern North Gulf Coast with gusts to 35. Northeast to 20 for the western North Gulf Coast. Barren Islands, winds east 15 knots, small craft advisories. Kamishak Bay and southern Cook Inlet, northeast winds 25 knots and light variable winds for northern Cook Inlet with slight seas. Then on Sunday, northeast at about 20 knots, be a pretty cold northeast wind, very cold northeast wind, northern Cook Inlet on Sunday. Same thing for Prince William Sound, northeast at 20 knots, and small craft advisory, southern Cook Inlet for 30-knot winds there. Gale warnings for Kamishak Bay, northeast 35. And for the North Gulf Coast, generally, on average, anywhere from southeast to northeast winds, western North Gulf Coast northeast at about 25 to 30 knots, and the Barren Islands, east winds 25 knots. Kodiak Island, east-northeast winds 25 to 30 knots for Saturday. Gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula, east winds 35 to 40 knots, east winds 30 knots for Bristol Bay, seas at about 6 feet. For Sunday, northeast winds 30 knots, Shelikof Strait and Bristol Bay with 7-foot seas. Otherwise, the Alaska Peninsula, winds east 30 knots and 25-knot winds there for the east side of Kodiak Island. Gale warnings for the eastern Aleutians, east winds 35 to 40 knots, seas 15 to 20 feet. And gale warnings for the central Aleutians, east 30 to 35 knots. and 30-knot winds for the western Aleutians with seas 12 to 15 feet. On Sunday, western Aleutians, southwest winds at 25 knots, and east-southeast winds 25 to 30 knots for Adak. Eastern Aleutians, east-southeast winds 30 to 35 knots, seas 12 to 16 feet. 30-knot winds out of the east for the southwest coast and St. Lawrence Island, as well as St. Matthew Island. Pretty uniform wind pattern out over the central and northern Bering Sea for Saturday, except gale force easterlies at 35 knots for the Pribilofs with 13-foot seas there. Northeast at 30 knots for Norton Sound. And for Sunday, east winds 30 knots again. St. Lawrence Island, the southwest coast, and Pribilofs with the gale warnings now for St. Matthew Island out of the east, 35 knots. Variable winds, light and variable winds for Saturday for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, central coast, southeast of 15. East winds, 15 to 20 knots on the western Arctic coast, and small craft advisories from Wales to Cape Thompson for east winds at 25. That continues through Sunday. And then for the western Arctic coast, southeast winds at 20 knots, south 10 knots for the central coast, and a light west-southwest breeze at about 10 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. For tonight, very strong high pressure. The pressure there, altimeter, way above 31 inches with 1,061 millibar surface high there over the eastern interior. Dry, cold conditions, windy through the mountain passes of the eastern Alaska Range, Copper River Basin, North Gulf Coast, increasing winds across the Panhandle, especially in the north. And mild wet weather continues with southeast winds or east-southeast winds on the gusty side for the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, and Pribilofs through tomorrow with more showery conditions there for the central and western Aleutians. Risk of a snow shower possible for Kodiak Island due to light easterly flow carrying some moisture off the Gulf. Otherwise, no change over the interior with temperatures remaining well below zero north and west of the Alaska Range to the Arctic coast, and single numbers for the Kenai Peninsula, south central Alaska, and very cold air riding in on those strong north winds into the Panhandle for Sunday. Single numbers, lower teens for your highs, and cold all the way down to Dixon Entrance. Increasing moisture there over the Gulf of Alaska with a weak trough could spread some light snow up to Cape St. Elias, maybe the southern Kenai Peninsula, some moisture into Kodiak.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.